Thanks a lot for that, Mark. Yeah, so I'm just going to give a quick presentation on the work that we've been doing at Sandbox with our collaborators on the topic of FIDO2, these hardware tokens, and how we migrate to the new cryptography standards that are coming. So first, just a quick introduction about all of the. This is a big project with lots of people working on it. So we have blog posts, we have papers, and we have some repos as well that are open source. So I'm going to go into those a bit in the later part of the presentation. So yeah, I'll just give a really quick introduction of post-quantum, and then also what FIDO2 is. And then we'll talk about whether FIDO2 is ready, whether it's suitable for post-quantum, and then we'll talk about like the implementation, the open source implementation that we have, and whether post-quantum fits. So I think you've already had a few presentations this week on this topic, so I'll go over these quite quickly. So NIST are about to release, probably next week, the first set of post-quantum standards that we're going to have. These are two here that are called ML-Chem and ML-DSA, which are based on schemes called Kyber and dilithium. They'll be published in FIPS 203 and 204, and these are based on lattice problems. So basically noisy linear algebra, and we have 4 standards coming. One of them is a chem, and we'll have 3 digital signatures. Kyber is the only chem at the moment, and dilithium is known as the primary signature scheme. So these are basically the ones that we're going to be using fairly often. We also have a hash-based signature scheme called SLH-DSA, based on Sphinx. Based on using a lot of hash functions, basically. And then we're going to have another one called FN-DSA, based on Falcon, which is another lattice-based signature scheme, which is maybe going to be published a bit later in the year, maybe next year. It's a bit more complicated than the others, so I think NIST are kind of taking their time. So the previous 2 on the last 2 slides, and Sphinx will be published later this month, and then Falcon will be published a bit later on, I guess. NIST also have, so this is the release of the first set of standards, but we have a lot of other standardization efforts going on in post-quantum, so we will likely get at least one more key encapsulation mechanism. This will be based on code-based problems, so hardness problems in coding theory. I think NIST have stated most recently they'll decide between a scheme called BIKE or HQC, and I think maybe they will, if there's enough interest, they'll also standardize classic Macalise. They also have another, last year they started another signature scheme standardization effort called OnRamp. So I think that they basically started again, so I think there's about 40 schemes that are in consideration, and I think that will probably go on for a few years. I think they wanted something a bit more diverse, so something that's not based on lattices, and potentially something that has a small signature or a small keys. And I'll go on to the issue of signatures and key sizes a bit later on. So we have a lot of issues with post-quantum, at least when we compare it to the schemes that we have at the moment based on RSA or elliptic curves. So in general, the keys are larger, the signatures and ciphertext are larger. Certificates are going to be affected by this. The migration to these algorithms is going to be cumbersome, it's going to take a long time, and a lot of agencies and companies are recommending people to go down the route of crypto agility, which will significantly improve your security posture. It will also help you migrate to post-quantum a lot easier. We also have the issue of hybrid cryptography, which is when you combine post-quantum with a classical equivalent. So combining elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman with Kyber, for example. So you use two encryption schemes in TLS, for example. So this is a method that's been recommended by a lot of agencies and companies. So if you look at the migration that Google, Signal, Apple in their iMessage, they're all going with the hybrid approach for sharing these secrets. And then you also have the issue of like long-lived systems. How do you update these interconnected devices and things like that? So there's really is a lot to consider. And in terms of authentication, like I said, the signatures are larger, the keys are larger. Maybe we need bigger devices, like more expensive hardware, in order to actually get the same performance expectations that we have at the moment with elliptic curves and RSA. And yeah. So a bit about the performances, because this really sets up the challenges that we see in FIDO. So this is taken from a blog by Cloudflare, and I think the summary in this slide is basically Kyber has fine performance. It's bigger in terms of the keys and the ciphertext, but actually the performances in the end are comparable, and actually you see a big improvement. So Kyber uses a lot of like simple arithmetic, like multiplication and addition. Elliptic curves use a bit more complex operations, so you see the balance there quite nicely. And in the performances in TLS, there's no real degradation in the performances in terms of the handshake. This is quite a different story when it comes to signatures, though, because you see bigger signatures, you see bigger public keys, but the signing and verifying are quite affected. So here, instead of actually operations per second, we're using like relative runtime. So in terms of like, we have elliptic curves here at the top. Dilithium signing is nearly 5 times slower. And then in the blog, they like categorize this. So they start coloring things, which is quite nice. So I think in this slide, they're basically saying Sphinx is not applicable. It's 8,000 times slower for signing, and it probably shouldn't be used in TLS. Dilithium is sort of halfway. Its signature is quite big, and public key is quite big. It's the primary signature scheme, so it'll probably be used in the end, but it's still not ideal. There's a slightly lighter orange here, so this basically separates Dilithium and Falcon, because Falcon has a much smaller key and signature. The signing is quite a bit slower than Dilithium, so there's that unknown there, and then there's the green. So these are the schemes. So as you all see, like elliptic curves is all green on its row, but actually none of the others really have an all green row, and it's really not clear which one is the preferred in terms of performance. And this gives people like Cloudflare and Google like a bit of a headache in terms of what they'll use to get the expected performance that we're used to at the moment. So yeah, in terms of takeaways, like post-quantum chems performance is acceptable, signatures it's not really adequate. And they kind of go on to say that in terms of authentication, they don't really expect an uptake in post-quantum authentication until around 2026, and not many people will actually turn it on by default. And again, like really, unless people are encouraged to do this by regulations, this might not actually be used by many people based on the performances we see, the key sizes and signature sizes. So let's go into a bit about FIDO. So the preface of like why we use FIDO is effectively that passwords are terrible. People have really bad passwords, and this leads to a lot of like breaches and breaks and leaks. And so having a FIDO device gives you that extra layer of security. So a lot of breaches that we see online are based on bad passwords, reused passwords, or stolen passwords. And password managers, not a lot of people use them. I mean, there should, like, the values here should be a lot higher. I use them, this causes an issue. So basically, so FIDO it ensures, it gives you that extra layer. It's really easy to use as well. It's used quite often in governments. It's quite commonly enforced in companies as well. And this, it gives you this extra layer so that, you know, they know who's logging in and it's not someone that's stolen your password. So FIDO, basically, there's a FIDO alliance. So this is formed of a number of companies, Amazon, Apple, Google, Yubico, amongst others. And these are effectively the people that define the standards. So the current version of the standard is FIDO2. There's a number of companies. Sandbox a.k.a. is there, so we recently joined this year, but it's full of a number of companies, and also like standardization agencies and governments like NIST and and it's a global effort really. So a number of agencies in the UK and the US will enforce this, and it goes over users in like the NHS, the health services, and lots of different places. So also FIDO, it allows you to be a lot safer online. You don't have to remember all of your passwords, therefore your password reuse is a lot lower. It resists phishing attacks, I think, most importantly. And the FIDO Alliance are the people that also push for Passkeys as well. So these are also like encrypted tokens that effectively mean that we don't have to remember all of our passwords. So and Passkeys link with things like password managers as well. So logging into services and authenticating yourself is a lot easier if this is uptaken. So just a brief history. So FIDO goes back to 2014, and it was effectively a device for second factor authentication. Then FIDO2 came out, which combines these two protocols called CTAP and WebAuthn. In 2022, they developed the Passkeys, which I just described, which is like a synchronization of credentials across a number of devices. So here's just a bit again about Passkeys. I think based on time, I might just quickly skip this one. The FIDO Alliance took note of post-quantum this year. So they published a paper on technologies in post-quantum world, which is sort of a high-level white paper on the fact that, you know, post-quantum exists and they'll have to migrate to it at some point. But it really doesn't give any intuition on like timelines and things like that. It's really just showing their customers like post-quantum is a thing and it's coming and the standards will be here soon. So I'll quickly go over the FIDO2 protocol itself. So effectively we have four parties in this protocol. the user, which is one of us, we have a token. The token links to a web browser, and the web browser then talks to the server or the web application that you want to authenticate with. These, as you can see in the connected arrows, these will use the WebAuthn or the CTAP protocols. So the WebAuthn effectively gives you the authentication with the web service using the hardware token, and the CTAP makes sure the communications between your token and the web browser are encrypted and secure, and yeah. So this is like the flow of the protocol. It kind of begins with the web application sending some challenges to the token via the web browser. This then uses a key exchange. It uses symmetric encryption as well, and it requires a gesture. So we basically press the button this is part of the security, and then this generates keys on the device, and this is then sent back to the web application to either say that you're registered or to say that you're authenticated. So it's slightly different. It's slightly different for registration or for authentication. So it's yeah, you just send a slightly different item, I guess, and then you're authenticated or you're registered. So in terms of whether FIDO2 is ready for post-quantum, for WebAuthn, you effectively are if you switch out the signature scheme with a post-quantum scheme. With CTAP, it's the same answer really, but you then switch out the encryption method with something that's post-quantum. So for WebAuthn, yeah, you just basically use a post-quantum signature. Whether this is with just purely post-quantum or something with hybrid is a question you can solve. And with CTAP, it's slightly different because you're not using anything Diffie-Hellman anymore. You're going with a chem, which is slightly differently built up. But as long as you deal with that and you increase some of the lengths of the symmetric primitives or the hash primitives, then you're covered by the Grover algorithm. So this basically, as long as you switch out your classical primitives with post-quantum, then you're effectively covered. And there's sort of an issue with backwards compatibility. So if a device or a server or a browser doesn't support post-quantum, then you can just then roll back to the classical version. So just a bit on the signatures then, because as I said, signatures in the TLS example, they're slower and they're bigger. So in FIDO, we're dealing with really small, cheap devices. So realistically, it's going to get much worse. So an experiment I was running before for this talk is basically running all of the signature standards that we have that will be coming on an ARM Cortex board. And at the top, you can see elliptic curves. And then the rest of them sort of cascade down by fastest to slowest. And you can sort of see the degradation of performance for Falcon and dilithium. And yeah, I don't think Sphinx actually fits. So you can see like 2, 3, 4, 5x slowing of the sort of the operations per second in terms of signing and verifying. And yeah, Falcon is a bit of a strange case because it uses double precision floating point arithmetic. So the board I was running on has that FPU on it. So in order just to see it a bit better, you can look at like just the faster version of Falcon. But future, I mean, it doesn't mean that FIDO will have that FPU on it. So it's really an unknown whether we'll have the faster one or the slower one. So that's sort of a preamble of what we really wanted to present to you today. So at Sandbox, we've been working on this end-to-end post-quantum FIDO to open source implementation. So for our first sort of initial release of this, we used dilithium and Kyber. So those are the two main standards for encryption and signatures. And the whole flow of what I showed you before, the end-to-end flow, is post-quantum secure. So we basically use Kyber and dilithium for this. And we made the implementation of this open source on our repository on GitHub. So the basic foundations of this open source repository is a library of libraries. So we build the repository based on a framework called Trust, which is an open source FIDO authenticator based on Rust. It's a combination of two open source developers of FIDO tokens called NitroKey and SoloKey. So they got together and decided to build a common repo so they can sell their products. We use the Firefox open source client there, and for the server we use the Yubico open source repository. Trust, like I said, is based on Rust. So for the Trust side, for the token, we use a library called PQ clean, and then just wrap that in Rust basically. For Firefox, we use a Rust implementation of Kyber, taken from the repository underneath. And for Yubico, that server is Java, so we use another library called liboqs, which has a Java version of that. I think it's mainly in C, but then it has another repository where it's just, I think it just wraps the repository in Java. So we have a lot of we have C, Java, and Rust going on here. And for the device, for the token, we basically use the same tokens that are used by NitroKey. So for the development of all of the code, we just use the development board, and the token is based on an XP chip, and it's similar to an ARM Cortex M33, and I think this is also similar to what you will see in your Yubico devices as well. So in terms of power, performance, and things like that. So we have some initial results in terms of how dilithium affects the overall runtime and performance of the FIDO2 sort of end-to-end flow. So here's some results for elliptic curves where we see we're basically doing registration and then authentication, where we have steps where basically everything starts at 0 for the registration start. The prompt is when you touch the device and say, start, I want to authenticate and register. Then you have a point there for registration success. That means we've gone through the flow and we've registered. And then we go to the start of authentication, and we basically do the same thing again in terms of the computations. For dilithium, we see a huge spike in the points where you see them using a signature. So the point between a user pressing the token and the success of the registration, you see at least double the runtime there. So we've got milliseconds here on the y-axis, and then after that you sort of see the flatness that you see in elliptic curves. So that's sort of expected, I guess, because you're not doing anything computationally intensive. And then once you then start authentication and you succeed in the end, then you see another big increase. So I think in the end you're looking at 3.5, 4 times in terms of longer period for the user for sort of the end-to-end experience. Whether this is acceptable for the user or for the company that's actually providing these devices is a question. And from the sort of the beginning discussions of do we need a bigger hardware, like more expensive hardware? This could then sort of flatten the curve a bit, and we'll see, something that we're used to in terms of performance before. Oh yeah, I forgot about this. We have a demo. So I didn't want to do a live demo. Right, so it's just playing. Cool. So here a user is just basically putting in some dummy credentials, so a username, and a nickname, and an ID. So this, then we want to create a passkey. We have to do the gesture, so the prompt, and this then creates I think we're doing registration. So yeah, we've done registration. That's quite small, I'm sorry. And then I think we see sort of a success message. We see a message there just saying what algorithm we use, which is lithium-3, which outputs the public key length just to make sure. And we've got time there of 3 milliseconds, and then I think that's the signature. And then I think then we then authenticate using the passkey that we just created. We then do the prompt again, the gesture, and this will then run through the authentication. So all of this is open source. Like I said, you can experiment and play with this. If you get a Solar key or a Nitro key, you can. They're made that if you get the hacker token, I think it's called, you can then start playing around with this and just keep reflashing and keep experimenting. Is that it? Yeah. So I think I'm coming to the end. Oh, I've got 2 minutes left. Cool. Perfect. So just to summarize, I think there's big challenges in terms of getting post-quantum FIDO finished and ready. I think there's a long time left for getting these to customers. I think one of the big things that people need to figure out is, do we need a change of hardware in order to get this performance to a level that we expect, or will this performance, like you've seen on the boards, will this be enough? I think one of the things we're sort of concerned with is the user experience. So if a person does the gesture, will they sort of keep pressing it? If they're used to the performances you've seen already and nothing happens, will they just keep pressing it? And will this cause an issue with it actually working and authenticating? So that's one of the biggest issues I think we've seen. And yeah, so I think going forward, I think we want to integrate almost all of the signatures. So there's Falcon still to come, and there's also the 40+ signatures that are still a part of the NIST process, and see which one is more suitable for FIDO, which one is more suitable in terms of do we do hybrid signatures as well. And then you've got there's different modes in FIDO as well. So you've got attestation and key storage and things like that, which I haven't really discussed. But bigger keys, you're going to have less ability to store your keys on the device. So I think that's it. There's some list of resources there if you want to go and experiment, and we're hiring. So we always put that at the end. But thanks.
That was excellent. If there's a couple of, you okay to take a couple of questions?
Yeah,
Are there any questions? If so, come up to here. Put this on your chin and ask your question.
Hi, so on my chin, okay. If you're using hybrid methods, does that mean that both CTAP and WebAuthn will also have to be modified to accommodate for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think you'll do two encryptions at the same time. I don't think you'll go through the flow twice. Right. But there's a way of combining encryption together. So there's a way to sort of combine them all together. So
2 keys at registration.
Yeah,
and sort
2
of
keys.
a
Yeah,
picker at
yeah.
authentication.
It's effectively he's doing both at the same time.
All right, interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. On you, Jim.
Testing. So is this real in a commercial environment? Is this realistically at the point where it can be deployed now? I know you talked about performance issues. Have you seen customers actually in a commercial or government environment utilize this?
I haven't. I don't think this is really this is the sort of the pinnacle of you're looking at big schemes on a small device. And there's things like TLS, end-to-end messaging and things like that. There's bigger targets for post-quantum migration. So I don't see this being one of the big targets at the moment. But these are, like I said, these are used in secure environments for government and healthcare and things like that. So I do expect this to be on the list of things to do quite soon, maybe.
And one final question.
2 questions. Can I get a selfie with you?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Also, all these AI custom pipeline chips that are ending up in a lot of the Broadcom, but also like Apple's throwing them into everything. Do you think those can be repurposed to kind of help out with some of the performance hits we're going to get when we switch to quantum proof?
What was the first bit?
Like the AI chips that they're calling.
Oh,
that
yeah.
They're sticking on all the socks. Yeah, tensor and all that crap. Yeah.
I don't know anything about this.
Oh, no problem.
Sorry.
No problem.
But it really depends how cheap they are. I think like the badges we have at the moment are sort of a good starting point, maybe because they're new. They're $5. I think the YubiKeys go up to about 100, but you're adding in like the manufacturing costs and all of that and profit and stuff. So I don't really know how much the sort of the chips actually cost for the manufacturers. So could be a good thing to look at.
Thank you.
Well, that's a really interesting question to finish on, the whole repurposing of all the compute that we've invested in AI and how that's going to help us. Okay, if there's no other questions, thank you very much to James.